Hello everyone. Hope you all are safe and doing well. Excel in Excel welcomes you all. We are back with a new fresh talk this weekend. Thank you all for joining this event. We welcome you all. I also welcome Mr. Mark Walter, who will be addressing us in the next few moments. Let me give a gist of Excel in Excel. Excel in Excel is a data analytics firm that solves high impact business problems using data and technology. We provide end to end services in the field of data analytics and data visualization. Our core services include analytics, consulting, and training. Excel and Excel presents the popular talk show EiEFreshTalk on its YouTube channel, where it hosts great leaders and subject matter experts in various fields from India and abroad to speak regularly on variety of topics ranging from Excel to analytics and finance to financial modeling. Few of our past events were Analyzing Data with Power BI by Mr. Amit Chandak, Time Intelligence in Power BI Desktop by CAS Ratnagiri, 10 Common DAX Problems and Solutions by Mr. Chandeep Chabra, and HR Analytics using Power BI by Mr. Banu Kumar. Coming to our today's session. Our today's session is on creating income statements P&L using Power BI by Mr. Mark Walter. Mr. Mark Walter is an accounting professional passionate about data modeling and storytelling in Power BI. Mr. Mark is an Oregon certified public accountant with a finance degree from Western Washington University. He has multiple qualifications, including an accounting degree from Central Washington University, advanced modeling in DAX, and Power Query ETL training. Mr. Mark is an accounting and analytics manager at Industrial Finishes and Systems, INC. He is responsible for financial data modeling and data storytelling, both internal and external to the organization. Outside of IFS, Mr. Mark also enjoys speaking with local finance groups and blogging at storybi.com. He develops and shares financial and supply chain insights that supports his company's divisions. His goal is to empower the business to make better decisions through data and dialogue. His area of expertise include business intelligence, finance, and accounting. He has experience in multiple areas like distribution supply chain, healthcare, service relating to federal contacts, and local government. We welcome you, sir. Before we begin, I request the participants to join me in welcoming today's speaker with a hi in the chat section. For any questions or comments, kindly use the comment section. We will later present it to the speaker. Over to you, sir.
All right, thanks for having me. Let me see if I can share my screen. Are you able to see my cover screen there?
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, thanks for having me. I am Mark Walter. I've been working at Industrial Finishes for about 7 years now. I'll just share a little bit about me. I'm originally from Honolulu, Hawaii, where I was born. I moved away to Seattle when I was about 15. Went through much of my schooling in the Seattle area. Worked for a city, a local city in Washington State before moving down to Eugene, Oregon, where I became accounting and analytics manager at Industrial Finishes. A little bit about the company that I work for. We serve multiple markets. We don't create anything or manufacture anything, but what we do is we service auto body shops where they fix cars. We help produce RVs or recreational vehicles like campers and buses. And so you see some of our markets here. We've got the auto body portion of our business represented in green. So we're mainly up in the Northwest, Washington and Oregon. We've got our industrial division in purple, where we service wood products like packaging. And so we distribute packaging for rail cars in the places that are in purple there. And then in red, up here, kind of in Indiana, is where we do the RV painting. So much of our business is painting. We sell paint. We help companies paint things, cars and RVs. And then we also have an aerospace division where we help the military paint jets. So that's exciting. So we're in all these markets. So you can obviously see that we have a need to share information over multiple states. And this session specifically is going to be about the income statement. We use Excel every day. We use Power BI every day for multiple purposes. And one thing that I've had a passion about lately is how we can bring insights with our income statement to our executives. And we've gone through a pretty long progression of trying to mature that presentation, starting in Excel, working in Power Pivot 5 or 6 years ago, and then eventually moving into Power BI and really figuring out the best way to present that information on technology, but also how to present it face to face and over the phone. We've got a couple different types of income statements here that we use in the US. We use specifically what's called the multi-step format, and it starts with net sales at the top and it ends up with net income. What you have in the middle is cost of sales and of course these subtotals, gross income, you've got pre-tax income, and then finally net income as subtotals. And so we'll get into that a bit later, but that does represent a little bit of a challenge when you're trying to represent that in a pivot table or a matrix in Power BI. Here you can see a actual example of our income statement. I've blurred out the actual numbers, but I want to show how complicated a paper statement can be to look at. We have 40 plus locations. Look very similar to this. And you can see that there's a lot of lines there. They all look very similar. And these columns that we send out are the current month, year to date, prior year to date, and then a percentage change year over year. And then these percentages in the middle or next to all these columns represent the proportion of every line in dollars to income, or sorry, to revenue. So all these percentages matter as well. Our experience in sending out these income statements, and we've sent this paper based income statement out for 20 plus years, and we consider this our Bible. And so when we send this out, we have a lot of managers out in our field that aren't financial people. They are salespeople. They're primarily tasked with making sales and earning customers and bringing them into the business. They're out on the road, driving around every day. And then we ask them to stop and read this income statement, understand their business, look for opportunity, and make changes if needed. And when I started 7 years ago, I was tasked with working with these managers, making sure that they were grasping their statements and making those decisions. And I'd hold monthly calls with them. We'd go over the paper, and we'd spend most of the time just trying to agree on what line we were on or agree on what the numbers meant. So there was clearly an opportunity there for us to improve how we displayed the income statement, but also how we spoke about it, how we exchanged information. So I've created this diagram, and what it represents is kind of our evolution into figuring out a better format or a better way to share. And what this shows is that when we brought just data on that paper, and we were trying to explain it to the end user or to the stakeholder, whether it was on paper or whether we were bringing a spreadsheet into a meeting, we often left with more questions than answers. We would meet over the spreadsheet, and if you've been doing spreadsheets for a long time, you probably know the experience of being tasked with creating a report for a meeting and then going to that meeting with that spreadsheet and spending a lot of time trying to find where we're at. And then people start asking, well, what if we showed it this way? Or what if we changed this column to read a different set of numbers? So often, my experience at least, was that I would spend a lot of time manually creating a spreadsheet, presenting it, and then having to go back to my desk and kind of revise it and change it. And so this back and forth just took a lot of time, and we just moved on in the business and really didn't get those questions answered. So, like I said, when we started dabbling into Power Pivot, and the first few years of in Power BI, we were looking for a way to bring the income statement into a more user-friendly format, something that that the managers could access themselves, not necessarily on paper, but that they'd be able to interact with and have the option to drill down into more information. When Power Pivot came to be, it was amazing to be able to connect to everything in our general ledger from that program. And so in Power Pivot, what we did was we connected to the GL data and we pivoted it. And so it didn't look like this in Power Pivot. This is obviously Power BI, but you get the idea that I took the GL that we had and put it into a pivot table. I started sharing this with our managers, and we'd get on a monthly call and we'd walk through this, and I thought it was wonderful. I love this because it not only brought them one statement, it brought them a statement for every month, and they could see it side by side and see their monthly progression. Now, this is kind of a simplified version, but we also use this in accounting. So the way that we combine this for manager and accounting uses, we had a bunch of slicers over here, which would allow us to data mine and really explore the key details in the statement. But on the financial statement calls, we would use it and we'd just go over the current month. And if we had to look at year to date, I'd roll that up. I had a different view of that. Well, what we learned from this experience, bringing out the pivot version or this multi-month version to the end user, was that when we brought that data and brought it through visuals now, interactive visuals, we still ran into a challenge with our end users. And we used it for about a year. And we'd have the calls, we'd have the paper with us, and they were good calls, but they weren't really sparking ownership by the managers in that pivot format. The way I explain it is that it was kind of interesting for them to see. They were kind of interested by the technology. There were a few that were very good with their computer, and they knew how to go in and get their detail out if they needed it. And I'll come back and show you one aspect of this thing that there was a little bit of a challenge, was that when I promoted this thing, I promoted it as a tool that they'd be able to dig into and find reasons for transactions. They wouldn't have to call me in accounting every time that they had a question on one of these numbers. So we would demonstrate how they could go in here to one of these levels and just start drilling in. Let's take shipping and supply, for example. So I'd say, well, you can drill in there. You just keep clicking this label here, or that dollar at the time, and some rows may be blank as it doesn't apply to that transaction. But if you keep clicking, you'll get down to the details. So here we bought stuff from Office Max. We paid it on an AP invoice, and we just keep clicking. Let's see what else we have. We have individual invoices by month. You have this kind of cascading thing here. Well, this was an early version, and what I would hear back from the managers when I'd say, hey, you've got the power to go get your own information. The feedback I would get from them was it's too much to ask me to drill in. I get to drill in here, and then I don't know where I'm at in the statement. I don't know how to get back. These buttons here are kind of hard to know that they're even up there. They disappear. And then once I get down and start rolling back, roll up too far, we've got the grand totals there. Well, now you have to go down and you have to drill down once. So this was a problem. I mean, this was an adoption problem on our end. It was great to be able to have all the data in one spot, but it wasn't necessarily great for sharing and empowering our managers at the same time. So we had the visuals, we had the data, we were still getting that feedback that it was interesting, nice to know. And so we sat down and we talked about some culture things. We were just now getting into Power BI. We were exploring the concepts that we'd learned in Power Pivot in Excel. And I will stop and just share a little bit about my evolution into Power BI. I'm an accountant. I work in Excel, and what drew me to Power Pivot was that I was at a point in my career where I was looking for that next step. I wasn't a programmer. I was a business person, but I kind of leaned toward technical. So my interest was how could I take my Excel skills and further automate that and further summarize information for executives. And so at the time I was looking at VBA, and I dabbled in macros and just off and on. My challenge with macros was that I could never get them to keep working. They would break. And then I was just starting out in VBA, and again, wasn't a programmer. VBA just didn't click with me. I was looking at something more business driven, not a programming language. And so we had stumbled on Power Pivot, and I saw that as an extension of what I was already doing in Excel. So when I saw that I could pull in hundreds of thousands of records every second, so we were experimenting with Power Pivot. And when I started importing our GL and watching how many thousands of rows we're importing and downloading every second, I thought, well, this is amazing. And I love I love pivot tables. And I'd always wanted to be able to pivot based off of multiple tables at the same time. And that's what Power Pivot allows you to do. So I was thrilled with Power Pivot. That got me into learning DAX. So I bought Rob Colley's first book on Power Pivot, I believe it was called, and then he wrote a second one. But that book by Rob Colley really got me grasping DAX. And the thing about DAX is that it's DAX, and that this technology is built specifically for the business user. It's meant for the Excel person that's strong in pivot tables. And so when you start learning DAX, and I'm sure a lot of you know, DAX, the origin of DAX was partially based on the Excel language. So there's a lot of Excel functions that are in DAX that work very similarly or the same way as they do in Excel. So that was very attractive to me. But now that we're in Power Pivot and then moved on to Power BI and kind of working in Power BI, which is essentially the same technology, but put in a different tool, that Power BI tool comes with a different concept. And it came for us, it came with the opportunity to kind of mature our data culture from the business, from the finance department, or from the accounting department. So for the first time, you're handing a business intelligence tool and those capabilities to the accounting office. And over time, what you'll learn in Power BI is it's not just data. It's just not publishing a report and sending it out. Yeah, the opportunity there really is to shape a data culture with the stakeholders that look at that information. And so looking at that cultural aspect, we asked our stakeholders or the executives from a financial statement perspective, what would you like to see? I mean, if we had a magic wand and you could have the perfect statement, what would it answer for you? What would it show? And then on the other side of that, what would be hard for you to get used to? What would turn you off from having to look at a statement like that? And then looking at how the report is used, and if there was room in our dialogue or when we met over the financial statement, if there was an opportunity there that we could kind of change our language. So when we had that conversation, we could use key terms that we'd agree on meant certain things as we talked about the statement. So we'll see that as we go on here. From the technical side of creating an income statement that was better for the executives, we had decided that we wanted to have a financial statement that utilized the matrix in Power BI and use custom time intelligence. But the most important thing to us was that we stick to that paper format. The number one feedback that we got from our users was that 20-year-old format was going to have to stick. And if we were going to gain adoption in Power BI, the paper format would have to be at the base of that thing. And then after that, more insights, right? Like you saw our statement a few slides back. It was just black and white numbers. It was just numbers on a piece of paper. You could press it, didn't do anything. It wasn't shaded with color in any way. So there was a need for kind of color to be overlaid on that statement to kind of draw your attention to certain things. We didn't want to flip pages. We wanted to stay on one page. So there was also a need to look at alternate statement views. We wanted to see year to date on one view. We wanted to compare just the current month to the month prior year. So that was going to be another view. And then we wanted to add a view where we could look back with the current month and see kind of like a rolling 3-month average. We wanted less clicks. It was very clear that the advantages of Power BI to our stakeholders was that for the most part, what you saw was what you got on the screen. You didn't have to go into other sub screens. Our less technical users loved that because they knew that they could just bring it up and then click around it and get their insights. So the single screen with less clicks was important. And then finally, we looked at what drives dialogue, right? And this is where we start realizing that Power BI is not just a data provider. It also helps us with dialogue. We've got a couple examples of how that played out very well for us. Not only with the income statement over time with our managers, but we also have an experience where we went out to our external customers. So we went out to body shops with sales information, with profitability information. And for the first time, we were able to change that interaction with them. Prior to Power BI and bringing that out to our body shop customers, we bring them a spreadsheet, much like an income statement to the manager. And we would show them that spreadsheet, and they're in body shop. They're not accountants. Their primary job is to fix cars and run a business. And so a lot of them just would say, we're not numbers people. We know that you're trying to calculate profitability, but we don't have time to look at spreadsheets, and we're not going to share our numbers with you. Well, when we converted that analysis and put that into Power BI and started bringing it back out and asking them if they'd look at this, over time we realized that as we shaped our story around that profitability analytics, they opened up. They became numbers people. So it was interesting to see how Power BI brought us this way of having a dialogue that people were very receptive to, and it was no different with the income statement. So now we have all the pieces in place. We go from data and we go to the stakeholder at the bottom, and we feel like we struck on this idea that if you put visuals and a story between data, raw data at the top, and the stakeholders at the bottom, and you perfected that story, you weren't explaining, but now you were sharing a story with someone, and you were sharing that dashboard experience. We just started seeing people take ownership and be motivated to act. And it was a very interesting progression. It took a number of years, and it started in Excel, and it ended up in Power BI. So I showed a little bit about the first statement here, how we had every month lined out in different columns, and we looked at how we could drill in, and I would have to be the one that mainly drove this thing because people would get kind of confused with the drill downs. Now compare that to what we eventually landed on. We call this the statement reader. And the reason why we don't call this the financial statement or the income statement is because we had so much loyalty to that paper. And since we were going to create something electronically that mirrored that paper anyway, we would start to promote this thing as the financial statement reader. And so when we have our calls, the idea was that you're still looking at your paper as your main statement, but we're going to look at this thing as well. And it's going to help us read our paper, right? Well, over time, it didn't take long for us to get the paper out and just spend more time looking at this thing, because it mirrored our statement and it brought a little bit more to it. Now this looks like the paper. It's really no different in format. We've got the current year to date. It defaults to the year look or to the year to date look. So we're on a fiscal year. So we go from July through June. And so so when you open this thing, it shows you where you're at in the fiscal year. This happens to be a full year, so we're in June here. So what we're looking at is fiscal year to date to the end of the year for the current year on the left, gross sales, cost of goods, and then we've got our subtotals. And so we'll talk about how to get a subtotal in here. We have our payroll, our selling, all of our expenses. And then we're able to come down and calculate another subtotal in net income, and then net before allocation. So we've got all these subtotals injected in here, right? If you work in the matrix, you'll in Power BI, you'll know that there's no feature currently in the matrix that lets you put in custom subtotals. So this takes a little bit of playing around with to figure out, and we've got plenty of time to go through that. So we've got the current year, we've got the prior year, we've got those percentages that show us the relative share or ratio compared to net revenue. And then over here, we've got our difference columns. And so one thing that we look at the dollars and we look at the percentages. So for instance, we'll come down here, and to be able to answer if our payroll's high or not, we'll look at the ratio of this year versus last year and see how much that ratio's changed to net revenue. So the business may change, the dollars may go up and down, but we know that on a relative basis should be the same ratio or the same percentage. So the first variance column here, we have percentage difference. That's not a growth column, but that's just a mathematical difference between these two percentage columns here. And so that's our first clue to see if there's something going on with that line. And if it's unfavorable, and that's one of the terms that we started using, is unfavorable or favorable. If it's unfavorable, it's highlighted in red, and it's relative to how large that change is. And then we've got dollar difference here as well. So we've got percentage change, dollar difference, and we just started realizing, or we set the statement up so that when you saw red in red, we call that unfavorable. And so we would come down here and go, well, we've got this manufacturer rebate line. We can see right away that there's an unfavorable change. Now, looking at that on the paper, you'd have to have a ruler out and a highlighter and go line by line and do the math in your head or on a calculator to be able to see that unfavorable change. But here you open this thing up and you see right away where the unfavorable changes are. And likewise, you see where the favorable changes are. So up here in gross sales, we see that we're growing by 12%. As you roll down the statement, you'll see that we have a very unfavorable change in repairs and maintenance, and we can look at that. You click on that, and it highlights a table over here. And now we're looking at repairs and maintenance year to date, but we're also clicking on it, cross-filtering, looking over to the right, and able to see in which months it went unfavorable. So this is a little dramatic because this is an example, but you can see that in October through June, repairs and maintenance really spiked. So I'll stop here and talk a little bit about just kind of the visual features of this thing and kind of answering those questions when we went out to our managers and asked what they wanted to see, what was important to them. If you remember, it was important that we stay on the page, right? We don't leave the paper format. So in order to avoid having to drill in within these lines over here, we just created a side table that gave us a little more detail, right? It wasn't overwhelming, but it kind of got them down that road into figuring out what was causing change. So it worked out very well to be able to click on repairs and maintenance on the left, not have that window change at all, just highlight, and then be able to come over here and see month by month. Now here, one thing we loved seeing was change over months. Like, what month did we start going bad on that number, right? And then from here, if you remember back in the pivot format of this income statement, when we were drilling in, we'd see all sorts of details. We'd see our row for every characteristic in those records. We'd see the vendor as a row. We'd see the type of payment as a row. We'd see the invoice. Well, when we open up October here and we're looking at the detail of each of the transactions, I didn't want to have to show them every element on a separate row. So what we ended up doing was back in the general ledger data table, we just created a custom column or a calculated column that said, when I'm in an expense row, when I'm in an expense account, what's important for me is to see the vendor, the document number. You can see the V and the D for document number, and then an explanation. That's all I want to see for an expense. That will get me far enough down the road to explaining what happened. I don't want to have to see that, say Jack was our vendor, and then I don't want to have to click again and see the document number, etc. So the way that we did that was we created that custom column in our data table, and it knew that based on the account, it was going to concatenate or bring vendor, document, and explanation. Now, we also had items up in the revenue section. If we highlight on gross sales, now I'm looking at sales, and sales was favorable. It was favorable every month over prior months. And I can see that highlighted in green. But when I drill into the gross sales line, I'm not interested in each sales order or each sales document. Our managers want to see which customers bought and how much. So in that same calculated column, my condition was, if I'm in a sales account or GL account, just bring me back the customer's name, right? So that same column that had vendor and document now just holds Bob's shop or Hunter's shop, our customer names. So this was a welcome way that we could bring our managers a certain level of detail without asking them to drill too far down into the weeds. It worked out pretty well. We talked about alternate views, right? So this is year to date, and this is showing the entire year. We've also got the monthly view. So I click on month, and it would show me the current month. And in our case, we're at the end of the year. So it's showing us June versus last year's June. And then we wanted a view where it would show the current month compared to a blended average of the last 3 months. So now we're looking at the current month here, and we're comparing it to a prior month average. So in order to do this and get this to work, we needed to do disconnected tables. And what a disconnected table is that you just create a simple table out in your model where you just have options, right? So this is a disconnected table for that view. It's got the month view, the year view, and the average view, and they've got assigned numbers. Now in my measures, when I'm calculating the result and I want my measure to know how to calculate that, I would use those numbers 1, 2, and 3 in my measure to be able to switch my calculation to go and get a different mathematical result. So one challenge that we figured out, and it took a lot of measure writing, and I'm happy to show you the measures, And by the way, this workbook is being shared out on my blog at storybi.com. So if you go out and find this blog post that talks about the financial statements and Power BI bear together, if you go to the bottom of that blog post, you'll be able to download this entire workbook and see those measures. But there's a lot of custom time intelligence in the background that was put into this thing to make sure that when a manager opens it, it opens it like they're opening their monthly statements. I didn't want them to have to go choose the current month or calculate year to date. I just wanted it to open and show them the current statement. So there is a lot of time intelligence back in the measures. So that's a little bit about the presentation. I'll talk a little bit about the subtotals. We had a challenge doing the subtotals, and if you look out on the web, how to put in custom subtotals into a matrix, there's a few different techniques, and I had tried them for presentation like this. On the surface, they worked. I ran into a challenge that when you want to let your users or the people in accounting download the details behind the table, some of the methods would duplicate all of the details in that subtotal line. So I could get the margin to show up here, but when we downloaded that information, I was ending up getting everything above it, every transaction, every record in this margin category. So it was doubling up on all these transactions. And I wanted to find a way where I could limit what it brought in when I exported that detail. I only wanted it to bring in that margin line. So we'll talk a little bit about that. So I've talked about most of these, but let's go through this slide. So there was a cultural slide where we talked about cultural needs, and then there's a DAX slide here, and it just summarizes the key DAX and modeling techniques that we use to get this income statement to show up. We use matrix subtotals, we use time intelligence, we use conditional calculations for the colors and the formatting, and then we use disconnected tables. So let's talk a little bit about the subtotals, because most people ask in Power BI when they're trying to replicate the income statement, how do I get a subtotal in a matrix when the matrix visual doesn't give me that ability natively in the visual or in the program? So this is kind of my learning path on figuring this part of it out. So I've created a test mini model here where we have cost, margin, sales, and selling. It's not necessarily in order yet for our statement, but I will walk through this, and then we will sort it and see what happens. So I've got some test measures over here in a measure folder where I've calculated margin, and then a sum, which is just a sum off of the GL, off of the amount column. And then I've got what's called a test switch. And so the technique that I went with was I started out with my test margin, and I knew that I could write a calculate measure where I took that sum out of the GL, I calculate, and then put that sum in there. And then I use filters in my calculate to isolate just the portion of the statement that I need to calculate margin with. And in this case, margin is a combination of sales and cost. So I say calculate my test sum, and then I want to filter and only show sales and cost, or only consider that. Now, if you know about filters like this used in calculate, these filters here will actually overwrite. So when we talk about filter context, and we know that it's somewhat like our pivot table in Excel, where we drop a cell in, and based on the line or the coordinates in the pivot table, it should calculate the appropriate dollars from your data table, right? But when you use calculate and you do these overwrite filters, or you just simply say, my group name should equal sales, or with the double pipe, my group name should equal cost. When you put in a filter like that in a calculate, it overwrites. It actually goes, it's exactly like opening up and saying ignore these row labels and just go get sales and go get cost. So the result of this test margin, I drop it in this column here, is you can see for every label, it just ignores that label. And it goes and calculates the combination of sales and cost. So that right there was one way that I could create a margin line. And you'll notice that there's a margin label, and that's actually from a related table called my financial order table. And all that order table is a list of all of the category line items in my financial statement, and they're given a certain order number. So we'll see that. That's how that margin is showing up. Is it's not necessarily part of my GL table, but you'll see that it's part of my financial statement order table. And I'm pulling from that order table to create this label, not for my GL. So I've got this 130 here. It's regardless of label, it's showing up and calculating sales and cost. And then I wanted to have it, know when it was on the margin line. So let me go show you where the order, the test financial order is. We'll look at that table. So here's this is a mini model, right? So it's just a very small example, but this is basically what is in the background of my income statement, is another separate table that lists all the items that are listed on my statement. So I've got sales at the top, cost, margin is a subtotal, which is a custom subtotal, and then my selling. And then within there, I've got separate lines, right? So my income statement has a group name and then separate lines. So within sales, I've got gross sales and discounts, and then cost of goods sold and under cost, shipping, and all these line items. So the purpose of having this table is not only that I can establish group names and line names, but I can also provide them a certain order. So I've got a group number order and a line order, and this is required for presentation. Otherwise, your matrix is going to want to alphabetically sort your group name or your line name. So I've got this table out there, test financial order. So you can kind of see it here. I've got my test financial order table, and then it's related down to my GL that holds all my data. And so that information from up here is related and connected and flowing into my test GL. So that relationship allows me to use these dimensions in the rows of my income statement, and then also pull the dollars to total from the GL, but have them respect these labels and this order up there. All right, so we've got the test margin and that works, and then we're going to create what's called a switch. And this is the other requirement to calculating that subtotal, or getting that subtotal into the right spot. We'll go to test switch and look at that. And here I use variables. If you're writing DAX and using Power BI, variables for the Excel person is a wonderful thing. I compare it to using Excel and trying to write a complicated formula and using helper columns. And so I would write part of the formula in one column, and then I'd write the second piece of the formula in another column. Variables in a similar way. That's not the only use of variables, but one way that I like to use variables is just breaking up my measures. So here I've written a variable called group order, and it's selecting a value, and it's looking for the current group number that we're in. So for every cell that it evaluates under, it's going back to that financial statement order table, and it's looking for the group number. And then the second variable in here that I call switch is looking at that group order that it's currently in that order table, and it just says when you're on line 2.5, that's when you want to use your margin calculation. Otherwise, just use a raw total, right? So the result of this, and I write a return and then it returns switch. The result of this is that when I put that switch measure in my table now, I get cost, and then I get sales, and I get selling. But when I'm on the margin line, it knows that I'm on line 2.5 based on the evaluation of this table and the relationship to that order table. It brings back that 130. So I've got that margin to look for the margin line and then go back and use that margin measure that knows that that is a combination of sales and cost. Okay, so that's pretty great. So we've got that in a table. Now the next step would be, now I want to further build my income statement out and add lines to it. And then when I add a line to it, all of a sudden my margin goes away. So I lose my margin there, and that's not a good thing for our matrix, because we can't just have a statement that shows our income and our margin based on a group. So how do we solve for that? That's definitely a challenge. So one thing that I realized was that when I write that margin calculation, it is only clearing the filter or removing filter for the group name. But now that we have the line name in addition in our filter context, it's not able to get past this line name. And even though it ignores group name, it's not ignoring line name. So here we could say, remove filters, line name, and see gross margin, right? So that's a step in the right direction. We've removed filters. We've got group name and line name, and now we've got our margin showing. So that's a step in the right direction. Next thing that we want to do on this table is be able to sort this in the financial income statement format, right? So let's go to the financial statement order table, and remember we had the we had the ordering of the group, and we had the ordering of the lines. Financial order. So now we're going to go here and be able to click on group name and say, I want to sort group name by group number. By a group number. And that should do that. And then go to line name and further more. I want to sort my line name by line number. So I do that. I go back to my income statement and the margin's gone. The margin's gone again. I don't see margin anywhere. I don't see it up here. I see it in the total, but I don't see it in either of these tables. And one thing that I went around and around with this and did some digging and asked some friends that knew DAX better than me. And what we arrived on was that when you use that order tool back there, or you set the order to your table back in financial order, what you're really doing is you're adding those order numbers, or those numbers used to set the order, into your filter context. So even though you don't see them, even though you don't drag those numbers in here, they're still in there. They're still part of the filter context. And I believe that there's a different behavior in Power Pivot. Power Pivot, it's not as much of an issue because of MDX and how that query gets sent up to the engine and comes back down. But when you do this in Power BI, and that Vertipack engine is going to return to you a query that includes those order numbers. So just like we said, remove filters, remove the filter on the line name, we should order number on the group number and on the line number and if we do that, then our margins come back, our subtotals come back. So now we've got two tables over here, and we've got the income statement format in order, sales through our total, and it's got our test margin working right there, so we know it's always bringing back the margin. But then we also have the calculations here on sales, cost, and then net, right, or our total. We could put a subtotal in here, but it's just totaling. And then we bring our lines in, and because we said ignore the line number or the line name, ignore the group number and the line number, we're able to have that sort and have our lines in here, which show our margin calculation right there. And then on the matrix view that we see on our statement, we see it grouped appropriately with the line names below and all of the relative dollars, or all of the totals there. So that's a little bit about how I learned to create subtotals. And one thing I like about this is, yes, I do have to create separate measures for every subtotal. But what I like about this is when we pull out raw data from our table, it doesn't repeat all of the detail. I don't get the column for vendor. I don't get the column for document number unless I explicitly tell my measure that I want to see it, right? Or remove filters, right? So I'm only going to get what I have explicitly told it to give me. And in this case, I'm going to get the line and I'm going to get the group name when I export detail. As far as conditional formatting, if you remember, we had unfavorable changes and favorable changes. One thing you might need to do in your income statement is if in your GL your signs flip for any reason between debit and credit, one thing that we chose to do was represent all of our numbers as positive means increases to income, and minuses mean reductions of income. So that did mean that I had to go in to our GL and customize how those signs behaved in the GL. That can be very scary, very dangerous, but for us, we had so few changes to make that it just made sense. And it was only on the presentation here. It gets a simple sum to work well. And then it also means that these variances work just naturally. So the negatives were unfavorable for every line, including revenue. And then same with the percentage changes. So then from here, it's just a matter of going into these columns and setting conditional formatting, right? So I click on this table financial statement, I go to the formatter, and then I go to conditional formatting, and we should be able to see for the percentage difference column that I use data bars, and you go into advanced controls and you're able to set the colors and set some of the settings. On our actual income statement, we have parameters that will define how big those bars are based on dollars or based on percentages. Here I just have the lowest value and the highest value. And when it's a positive bar, I've used that custom hex color of green, and then negative is kind of a shade of red. So that's how those were created. I also use conditional on the dollar changes, and then conditional text color on the percentage change. Now, a big piece of this thing is getting the time intelligence to work. And with external tools and calculation groups, I know that there's a way that we can streamline this, and we can make better use of measures. But at the time when we created this, we were using custom time intelligence. And so I'll show under matrix measures, we'll look at the current dollar, which is measure 3. And what we see here is a massive use of variables, right? So I've done my best to comment out every step of writing these variables. But again, if you're not heavily into DAX and you look at this from an Excel person perspective, you're probably thinking that this is code. It's just a series of calculations that are broken up into different steps. The order does matter, because if you're going to call upon a variable that is from above, it's got to physically be placed above. But all this does is it breaks up a series of calculations that I want to consider when I get down to the actual math of the final result. And when I get down to the end of this thing, I'm just saying return my last variable. And what this last variable is it's a roll up of all of the separate calculations that were needed to figure out this equation. So I encourage you to download this and look at this. If you have any questions, definitely reach out to me. I'm happy to answer them. But this draws upon a lot of those disconnected tables, whether we want to look at the year view, whether we want to look at the month view, and then based on the current month or where we're at in the current year, it calculates custom time intelligence where we're able to ask the measure to go identify the current month that we're in and stop there, right, in both years. So when it brings back the dollars for the statement, it stops at the current month. So we were using this, and what if we want to go back? We added another disconnected table that would allow us there, and we could be looking at the current month. Wait for it to finish there. So we're at 64, and then we'd be able to roll back. We're in June right now, but if we want to go back to April, we could click April, and it would roll back, and it would roll back for both month and fiscal. So I'm wondering if there's any questions in the chat that we'd like to address.
As of now, there are no questions, Mark.
There are no questions?
No. So do you want to share some more information on the financial statements? Like any more tips for the audience?
Well, I could talk about just Power BI in general and my journey from Excel. If you're currently in Excel and you're looking at Power BI and you're wondering what the differences are, I still use Excel every day and I use Power BI every day. But the longer you use Power BI, I think the more you realize for the accountant type person that Excel is definitely a necessary tool for solving very specific business problems and questions. It's great for documenting the business. We use it every day to do like deal analysis with customers, solve challenges in the financial statement. But when I switch over to Power BI, and I've just had to learn this over time. When I switch over to Power BI, I'm now concerned about having a dialogue more than anything else. Where Excel is really good at taking unstructured information and doing ad hoc analysis. When I go to Power BI, I'm a designer of a tool. I'm using structured data. I'm trying to gain the trust of stakeholders. And when you try to do that in Excel, and it's possible, I'd done it for a while. You just don't get that same quality dialogue that we found that you can get in Power BI. Power BI is obviously very visual. You don't have the grid of the Excel spreadsheet kind of holding you back. There can kind of be a stereotype against wanting to look at a spreadsheet from certain users. And when you lose that grid and you make it visual and you bring in interaction, it becomes more of a collaboration. And over time, we've just found that with the income statement in particular, working with our managers, we've just had a better reception to it. So this is, I'm just trying to think about what else I could speak on the income statement. finding the subtotals was a big deal. That definitely helped us get down the road. Having that detail off to the side, it's definitely an advantage over a paper-based statement. It definitely brings more to your conversation with your managers. It empowers them to find some answers to some degree for themselves, and it does get them into the business better. I will show that. So we look at these percentage columns down here, and each row is a relative ratio or percentage of that revenue. Something that's important in our business is we're very curious about what our gross margin is. So this line right here, we've talked a lot about calculating it for our business. Since we're only buying and selling things, product is just passing through our business. So what we can earn on top of what we bought it for as we pass it through our business is a very important thing to us. And so, like I've said, these percentages mean a lot to us as well as the dollars. So if we want to see margin, I have an alternate percentage view where at the subtotal line, it calculates gross margin. And we'll give it a minute and it will calculate that. So now it's calculating at the subtotal line, it's calculating gross margin, right? And that's something that our paper has as well, but something our paper does not have is as you progress through and look at your expenses from payroll to selling to operating, it also calculates that remaining margin at the subtotal line. So we should have 21.6% remaining gross profit margin. And so in our business, when we look at the income statement, we start talking about cost to serve, right? Or the contribution margin, I guess, where you look at your payroll and after you pay your employees, you have 31 points of your margin remaining. It's just a different way to look at your business and make sure that you're profitable where you want to be, and that if say your payroll's high and it's relative to the prior year and it's really drawing on your gross margin, from a gross margin perspective, at least you know where to address your business. Is there any questions related to modeling or DAX that I can answer?
Not as of now.
Okay.
So, thank you, Mark. That was indeed an insightful session, and I'm sure the participants enjoyed it as well. On behalf of Excellent Excel, I thank you for sharing your wisdom, and I also thank the participants for the participation and support. There's an announcement for all. Excellent Excel is glad to inform you that we are conducting learning courses that will help you to upskill yourself. Hashtag EIE Learning, a set of handpicked online courses conducted by working professionals curated on a gamut of subjects like Tally to Excel and business analysis to Power BI. We have an upcoming course on robotic process automation using UiPath starting on 22nd October 2020 from Monday to Friday from 8 p.m. to 9:30 p.m. IST. The session is through YouTube Live via Zoom Bridge, where anyone can be a part of. Also, you can get to have hands-on session for better experience. Hence, I would encourage you all to make the use of this golden opportunity as we have only limited seats available. To apply, please visit our website. The link is there in the description. Our upcoming sessions are on 9 presentation hacks with PowerPoint by Mr. Geetesh Bajaj on Friday, 9th of October from 4:30 p.m. IST. Also, followed by a session on predictive analysis use case for risk assessment by CAS Deepika on Friday, 16th October from 6 p.m. onwards. So do not forget to like the video. For more updates, please subscribe to our channel. To know more on EIE Fresh Talk, use the link in the description box. We would be delighted to have suggestions from your end. You can drop your suggestions in the comment section and do stay tuned for more Fresh Talks. Happy weekend and thank you everyone.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for your time, Mark.
It's my pleasure.
Oh my god. Thanks, Mark. Do stay in touch. That was
Okay.
a very good session, and we appreciate you waking up so early and accepting our invite and taking a session for us. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I hope that was helpful. Thanks for having
Yeah,
me.
sure. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, Mark Shreyans here. I'd like to thank you, and it was great having you on board.
Yeah, I hope that was helpful. It's hard to know what the crowd's like, but I hope that touched on a little bit for everyone.
Yeah, it was like really good session, and we'll definitely try and share what we can.
Okay. All right. Sounds good. Thank you.
All right, thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bye.
Bye bye.